During the economic collapse of the early 20th century, a Midwestern farm wife sat at her kitchen table staring at empty cupboards. By 1933, farm income had dropped to one-third of 1929 levels. She had almost nothing. Yet she fed 8 people a meal that food writers now praise for its ingenuity. That meal is number 4 on this list. Number 18. Uses weeds pulled straight from the front yard. Number 9 was served at every rural funeral to communicate what words could not. These 25 recipes were designed strictly for survival, functioning to keep human dignity intact. We begin with a dish built on the absolute bare minimum. Number 25. Milk toast. When the pantry was bare, the family cow still provided milk. A single slice of stale bread was toasted over a wood stove, laid in a bowl, and covered in warm milk. A pinch of sugar or salt was added if available. It was often the first food given to sick children because it was soft, warm, and gentle. Upscale brunch menus today sell artisanal bread soaked in organic whole milk for $12. A Midwestern grandmother just called it Tuesday. Number 24. Cornmeal mush. Before the sun came up, farm children needed heavy calories to work the fields. The entire ingredient list was water, cornmeal, and salt. It was boiled until thick, then poured into a pan, allowed to solidify, sliced, and fried in leftover bacon grease until the edges turned crispy. Modern Italian restaurants call this creamy polenta and charge $14 a plate. Grandmothers served it with bacon grease and called it mush. Number 23. Potato soup. This was prepared when there was absolutely nothing else. Chopped potatoes were thrown into a pot of boiling water, and an onion was added only if the family could afford one. Some of the potatoes were mashed directly in the water to thicken the broth, while milk was introduced only if the farm had a cow. A full pot fed a family of 6 for pennies. French bistros now serve vichyssoise for $16, while the hot version was made on a farm for under a dime. Number 22. Vinegar pie. Fresh fruit was a luxury isolated farms could not afford during the winter. Women mixed sugar, water, flour, and butter, then poured in sharp vinegar. The vinegar provided a tartness that perfectly mimicked lemon. Producing a real dessert from pantry scraps was a source of quiet pride for rural women. A slice of lemon meringue pie runs $7 at a diner today. Vinegar pie cost less than 10 cents to make, and nobody could tell the difference. Number 21. Water pie. The name explains the exact method. It was a pie made literally from water because the family lacked eggs, milk, and fruit. Plain water was poured into an unbaked pie crust. Sugar and flour were sprinkled over the top without mixing. The surface was dotted with whatever butter could be spared, and then it was baked. Through the application of heat and chemistry, the filling set into a rich custard texture. It was an act of desperation and affection. A butter custard tart costs $8 at a modern bakery. Desperation pie used the exact same concept, born from empty pockets and strict rationing. When ingredients were unavailable, geography dictated the recipe. Number 20. Hoosier sugar cream pie. When the orchards were bare and fruit was out of season, farm wives in Indiana relied on the dairy barn. They mixed heavy cream, sugar, and flour, pouring it directly into an unbaked crust. It was called finger pie because women stood at the counter and stirred the custard filling with their bare fingers while it baked to prevent separation. Amish and Shaker communities perfected this out of pure necessity. Upscale restaurants now torch the top of a similar custard, call it crème brûlée, and charge $12. A great-grandmother made it for 15 cents. Number 19. Wilted lettuce salad. After a freezing Midwestern winter, families waited desperately for the ground to thaw. The harvest of the absolute first leaf lettuce from the spring garden was an event. Women fried a few strips of bacon and mixed the hot drippings with vinegar and sugar. That boiling dressing was poured directly over the raw lettuce, scalding it until it wilted instantly. It was the physical proof that the family had survived the frost. A warm bacon vinaigrette salad runs $16 at a farm-to-table restaurant today. Number 18. Dandelion greens. Long before modern wellness trends, German immigrant families knew the weeds invading their front yards were packed with nutrients. These groceries were not purchased, but rather foraged from the dirt. Children were sent into the yard with a bucket to pick young dandelion leaves for free. They washed off the mud and dressed the greens in whatever hot vinegar or bacon grease was left in the pan. Today, you can walk into a Whole Foods and buy organic dandelion greens for $4.99 a bunch. High-end bistros serve them for $14 a plate. Number 17. Potato cakes. Farm families did not waste a single crumb of food. Cold, stiff mashed potatoes left over from Sunday dinner were mixed with an egg and a handful of flour. They were formed into flat patties and fried in a cast-iron skillet until golden. This transformed yesterday's leftovers into today's hot meal. Potato cakes were simply Monday's answer to Sunday. Modern brunch spots sell crispy potato rosti for $11. Number 16. Bread pudding. When a loaf of bread went hard as a rock, throwing it out was unthinkable. That stale, inedible bread was soaked in a mixture of milk, eggs, and sugar. It was baked until the heat turned poverty into a warm custard. Even the most punishing ingredients were used, and nothing was discarded. Restaurants in New Orleans now drench it in whiskey sauce and charge $14. Midwestern farm women made the exact same thing from ruined loaves and called it using up. The gradual disappearance of these methods was not an accident. The modern food industry systematically replaced this knowledge. After World War II, food companies launched aggressive marketing campaigns targeting farm wives and suburban housewives. In 1953 and 1954, Swanson introduced the TV dinner. They sold 10 million aluminum trays in the first full year of production. By the 1960s, time-intensive scratch cooking was steadily replaced by processed factory meals. Today, nearly 60% of the calories consumed by the average American adult come from ultra-processed foods. The food industry convinced a generation that simmering a pot of humble ingredients was low class. Your grandmother's cooking was deliberately erased. Number 15. Chipped beef on toast. Dried beef was incredibly cheap and kept perfectly on a shelf without refrigeration. A fast, thick white sauce was made in a skillet from butter, flour, and milk. The dried beef was torn up, and the heavy mixture was poured over a slice of toast. It was unpretentious, working-class fuel. American soldiers during World War II ate this military staple so often they gave it a crude acronym SOS, or ESH times T, on a shingle. A modern gastropub will serve an open-faced sandwich with bechamel and artisanal cured beef for $17. A grandfather called it SOS and ate it standing at the counter in 4 minutes. Number 14. Depression cake. When eggs, butter, and milk were completely unaffordable or strictly rationed by the war, American mothers refused to cancel birthdays. Flour, sugar, cocoa, baking soda, vinegar, oil, and water were dumped straight into the baking pan. There was no mixer, no dairy, and no bowl to wash. The vinegar reacted with the baking soda to make it rise. A modern bakery charges up to $50 for a chocolate cake, while this cost under $2. Number 13. Hoover stew. Cheap hot dogs were sliced and simmered in a single pot with canned tomatoes, onions, and macaroni. It fed 6 hungry people for just 25 cents. During the Great Depression, Americans blamed the president for the economic collapse. They wielded their dark humor against him, naming their absolute worst poverty foods in his honor. A starvation meal named after the politician who let you down was a quiet, bitter form of rebellion. Number 12. Mock apple pie. Fresh apples were a luxury many desperate families simply could not afford. In the 1930s, a recipe appeared on the back of Ritz cracker boxes. Water was boiled with sugar and cream of tartar, poured over broken soda crackers in a pie crust, sprinkled with cinnamon, and baked. The cream of tartar created a sharp tartness, and the softened crackers convincingly mimicked the exact texture of baked fruit. It was a pie that tasted exactly like apple, without a single apple inside. It was an illusion built by mothers going to incredible lengths to give their children a normal dessert. Number 11. Creamed peas on toast. This was the standard Midwest supper when the meat finally ran out. A white flour sauce was made, a tin of canned peas was added, and it was poured over a piece of toast. Meatless meals were not a dietary choice. They were pure survival when a family hit the absolute bottom of the pantry. Shared meals became the infrastructure of rural survival. Number 10. Tater tot hot dish. The American Midwest church basement was where communities survived the hardest years together. Cheap ground beef was browned, mixed with canned vegetables, and stirred into cream of mushroom soup. The heavy mixture was topped with frozen tater tots and baked. The very first written hot dish recipe was submitted by a Mrs. C. W. Anderson for a 1930 Lutheran church cookbook in Mankato, Minnesota. This single baking dish could feed 20 hungry people when a neighbor's barn burned down or a new baby arrived. Modern bistros call it deconstructed shepherd's pie and charge $22. Number 9. Funeral potatoes. In the Midwest, a community responded to loss through physical sustenance. Frozen hash browns, cream of chicken soup, sour cream, and cheddar cheese were mixed together. The dish was covered in crushed cornflakes and melted butter. This Mormon and Midwestern tradition was specifically designed to be assembled the night before and served in large quantities to grieving families. It was the heavy, unspoken dish that communicated sympathy and ensured the family would not have to cook. Number 8. Chicken and noodles. This Sunday dinner wasted absolutely nothing. A single whole chicken was boiled for the broth. Thick egg noodles were rolled out by hand and cooked in that rich liquid. Then, in a display of Midwestern calorie stretching, the entire heavy mixture was ladled straight over a mound of mashed potatoes. Farm-to-table restaurants now sell house-made pasta in poultry broth for $19. Indiana grandmothers served it every Sunday over 30 cents worth of potatoes. Number 7. Biscuits and gravy. To survive 12 hours of backbreaking work in the fields, men needed dense, heavy fuel. Simple flour and lard biscuits were baked. Cheap sausage was browned, and the leftover pan drippings, flour, and milk were used to create a thick sawmill gravy to smother the plate. There was nothing elegant about it. It was hot, cheap, and strictly designed to keep farmhands standing until sunset. Number 6. Haluski. Eastern European immigrants carried their heritage into the harsh industrial winters of Cleveland and Chicago. The recipe required exactly 4 ingredients: egg noodles, shredded cabbage, butter, and an onion. The cabbage and onions were sautéed in the butter until soft, then tossed with the boiled noodles. Italian restaurants will happily serve buttered pappardelle with braised cabbage for $17. Polish grandmothers called it haluski, made it in 15 minutes, and fed their families for 15 cents. This frugality masked a deep understanding of nutritional chemistry. These women were not just surviving, they were accidental scientists. Without modern nutrition degrees or expensive dietitians, they understood the biological arithmetic of human energy. They extracted every single calorie, mineral, and drop of fat from ingredients that modern society throws in the garbage. Number 5. Navy bean soup. This was the ultimate caloric math equation. A small bag of dried navy beans was purchased for 5 to 10 cents and soaked overnight in a heavy pot. The leftover, heavily scraped ham bone from yesterday's dinner was dropped straight into the water. It simmered on the back of the wood stove for hours. The slow, continuous heat extracted the marrow, the collagen, and the last precious traces of fat directly into the broth. One single bone was mathematically stretched into 3 full days of food. Monday's ham became Tuesday's bean soup, which immediately became Wednesday's ham salad. A French restaurant serves white bean cassoulet and charges $24. Your grandmother made the exact same fundamental dish with a 5-cent bag of beans and a leftover bone. Number 4. Bread and butter pickles. For a Midwestern farm family, canning was a mandatory ritual of absolute survival. In August, women stood over boiling pots in sweltering kitchens, slicing hundreds of cucumbers and onions. These were packed tightly into heavy glass mason jars with salt, vinegar, and sugar. Those heavy sealed jars were carried down into the dark, cold root cellar beneath the farmhouse. Seeing those glass rows lined up on the wooden shelves was pure security. It was the physical evidence that the coming winter would not bring starvation. They earned their name because during the hardest years of the Depression, a sandwich made of plain bread, a scrape of butter, and these sweet pickles was considered a complete, sustaining meal. Artisanal house-made pickles sell at farmers' markets for $8 to $12 a jar. Farm grandmothers put up 50 jars in a single weekend. The harsh conditions of winter forced final acts of culinary endurance. Number 3. Tomato gravy. When the snow piled up against the farmhouse windows and the garden was buried beneath ice, families turned to the jars they had preserved in August. Leftover bacon drippings were whisked with a little flour to make a thick roux, and a jar of crushed summer tomatoes was poured in. It simmered with a pinch of salt and a little sugar. Then the heavy red gravy was poured straight over a plate of split biscuits. It was a calculated method to bring the warmth of summer into the dead of winter. Number 2. Handmade egg noodles. The ingredient list was simply flour, eggs, and a pinch of salt. The value was in the labor. A grandmother would stand at a floured kitchen table, kneading the heavy dough by hand. She pushed the dough paper-thin with a heavy wooden rolling pin before slicing it into crooked, rustic strips. Children watched those thick noodles hang over the backs of wooden kitchen chairs to dry. Brooklyn restaurants proudly serve house-made artisanal pasta for $18 a plate. Your grandmother stood on aching feet and rolled those noodles for 50 years without charging a dime. Number 1. The Sunday pot roast. This meal defined an entire generation of the American Midwest. The cheapest, toughest cut of beef, usually a chuck roast, was browned in an iron skillet. It was surrounded with cheap carrots, onions, and potatoes, and submerged in water. It was placed in the oven on low heat, and then the family left for Sunday church. The heat worked its slow chemistry during the sermon. When the family opened the heavy wooden front door hours later, the smell of the fork-tender beef hit instantly. Modern farm-to-table restaurants call it slow-braised heritage beef and charge $32. These recipes were forged in extreme deprivation. A family eating pie made from water was not making a lifestyle choice. They had absolutely nothing else. Yet, from that immense suffering, they maintained human dignity. They refused to let poverty strip them of their pride or their traditions. America's regional culinary traditions are now at risk of extinction. Buy the cheap ingredients, cook one of these recipes from scratch, sit at a real table to eat it, and acknowledge the physical endurance required for past generations to survive.